Today, we're going to talk about the New York City mayoral election. So, in this video, we're going to go a little bit shallow just to get an overview of this race, but depending on the reception to this video, I might make more videos on the New York City mayoral election, primarily because I am from the New York City area, so this is a race that's pretty interesting. And New York City is one of the biggest places in the United States besides Los Angeles and that metropolitan area. But New York as a whole, it's still pretty big, and thus the mayoral elections, which in other places might not be that important, are kind of important in this, since especially with the pandemic, there are a lot of candidates who are vying for a new vision of New York. In this video, we're mainly going to be talking about the Democratic candidates because the Democrats, at this point, are the only viable options for being mayor of New York. If you're a Republican and you're running for mayor, you're unlikely to actually win the candidacy in the general election, at least for the New York City mayoral election. And there's only just been a few exceptions to this. But those were 2 decades ago, back when the politics of New York was much more conservative, but now it is much more liberal with younger generations getting more into the voting system, and a lot of them vote for Democrats. So we're going to just take a look at Democrats, and here you can see on this map the funding and the most amount of donors in New York City. So the number of donors, but not the number or not the size of the contributions. So as we can see here, these are all the candidates, not all the candidates, but most of the more important candidates. We have Andrew Yang, who ran for 2020 as 2020 presidential race, and then Dianne Morales and Maya Wiley, Scott Stringer, Eric Adams, Raymond McGuire, Catherine Garcia, and Sean Donovan. So let's go through these people first because we need to know their experience, right? So Eric Adams was the Brooklyn Borough president, and he was a former NYPD officer, and that's the main experience right here that he wants to bring to New York City, that he wants to bring as mayor. Here we have Sean Donovan, the former director of the U.S. Office of Management and Budget, and the main thing he's talking about, the main thing his campaign is based on, is on housing, trying to make housing more affordable, but also trying to make housing and urban development more convenient so that people at most only need to walk for 15 minutes to different to get whatever you want. So hospitals or groceries, and that's his main campaign. For Catherine Garcia, she was the former commissioner of the NYC Department of Sanitation, and she's sort of the progressive candidate in this race besides Scott Stringer. And she wants to bring progressive policies that will try to elevate the lower income neighborhoods, the projects, into a better place, into a safe haven. For Raymond McGuire, he wants to bring his banking experience as a former Citigroup executive to New York City. He mainly wants to keep the status quo of Wall Street, and he actually also wants to make Wall Street thrive once again. And then down here we have Dianne Morales. She was a former social services nonprofit, and she wants to bring policies that are similar to the New Deal of Franklin D. Roosevelt, except include more equality for minorities and especially for Black Americans who were screwed under the New Deal that FDR brought in. So she wants to have one package that is incredibly large, but that revitalizes New York City and tries to restart the economy. Here we have Scott Stringer. Scott Stringer is the other progressive candidate. He is the NYC comptroller, and he is trying to bring policies that are similar to Bernie Sanders. And then below that, we have Maya Wiley, who was a new school professor, and what she's trying to bring a more moderate stance, kind of similar to Eric Adams. But she was also the former counsel to Bill de Blasio, and as well as the New York City Civilian Complaint Review Board. She also wants to bring education and bring more equality to education, giving it more access to to lower income families. And then finally, we have Andrew Yang, who is an entrepreneur and best known for running for presidency in 2020. What Andrew Yang wants to bring is that he wants to make New York City more of a small business place, try to steer it away from Wall Street, from its Wall Street roots, and develop more entrepreneurial and incentivize entrepreneurship, which is not surprising considering that he is an entrepreneur. So now that you have now that you have the list of all the major candidates, let's go over to the funding race. For the funding race, Andrew Yang has again the most donors in New York City, while Diane Morales has the second, and then you can see the list go on from there. And then this is the map of New York City and its 5 boroughs: Manhattan, Manhattan, the Bronx, Queens, Brooklyn, Staten Island, and I believe that's it, unless if I'm really forgetting something. It would be pretty embarrassing if I did not know my 5 boroughs. Anyway, so you can see that through this map, the kinds of people that each candidate is trying to get, and the demographics that each candidate is trying to receive. So let's start off with Andrew Yang. Andrew Yang, you can see 2 big areas. That's right here, in Manhattan, and then as well as Flushing. And in addition, he also does have Southern Brooklyn. And this is directly translated to demographics, and this is one reason why I love maps. It can show so much information. But let's go through these 3 areas. For this first area, the Flushing area, it's very unsurprising because Andrew Yang has gotten a lot of Asians and Asian American support, and a lot of them are concentrated in the Flushing area, in this part of Queens. So it's very expected that he would get a lot of donors there. And then he has some donors in Manhattan, and specifically, I guess, in the Midtown region, which is where a lot of young, aspiring New York City entrepreneurs are, and that's why he's gotten a lot of donors there. But finally, we have Southern Brooklyn, Southwest Brooklyn, and this may seem a little bit surprising as to why this area would contribute to Andrew Yang the most, but this group is mainly ultra Orthodox Jews. So that voting bloc is more conservative compared to other voting blocks, but they also want more. What they're asking for is more freedom from religious intervention by the government, and that includes New York City. When Bill de Blasio, or I guess Bill de Blasio is still mayor, but Bill de Blasio tried to get and tamper with the Jewish education system, and that received a lot of pushback from Orthodox Jews. So Andrew Yang committed that he would let the Jewish education system run by itself, so that it can be non-secular and the government doesn't have to be fully involved in that. And thus he received endorsements from Orthodox Jewish leaders, and that's why there's a lot of donations there. Now, moving on to Eric Adams. Eric Adams is the number 2 in this race. He's mainly gotten funding from Staten Island and as well as southeast of Brooklyn. And the reason why is because these are more moderate voters. These are suburban voters, especially in Staten Island. And ultimately, Eric Adams is the moderate candidate, even though Andrew Yang is as moderate, maybe even more conservative than Eric Adams. So he's gotten a lot of support here from suburban areas of New York City, and that's where most of his donors have come from. As you can see in Manhattan and in the more progressive parts of New York City, like the places surrounding Manhattan, he has gotten very few donors. It's mainly been near JFK Airport and along the Belt Expressway. And then moving on to Diane Morales. Diane Morales is catering to the Hispanic community. As you can see here, this area and this area do have large swaths of Hispanic voting blocks in the Bronx and as well as near Long Island City. for Maya Wiley. Maya Wiley, she's gotten most of her support from Black Americans and Black American leaders. She got an endorsement from Hakeem Jeffries just a week ago, and as you can see right here, that she's gotten most of her support from the Bronx, which is where a lot of Black Americans currently live in New York City. And then finally, we have Raymond McGuire. He is not really that big in this race, but ultimately, most of his funding is unsurprisingly coming from the downtown area of Manhattan, which is where Wall Street is, and then you also have the Upper East Side, and that is ultimately the funding that. Or I guess the donors in each part of New York. In terms of overall funding, Raymond McGuire has received the most amount of funding, and that's mainly because his donations, the people who donate to his campaign, are much more wealthy or wealthier than than the supporters that are going for Eric Adams or Andrew Yang or Scott Stringer. So those people are 2, 3, 4, and you can see here that they have raised $9.8 million, $9.1, and $7.3 million. So, but ultimately, money these days, it's not as important as it was before, because money does not always translate to actually winning the election. And that has been noted many times since the Citizens United v. FEC decision by the Supreme Court in 2010. And then finally, we have outside donations. And in terms of outside donations, it's mainly Andrew Yang who has gotten most of the outside donations, and that's because he's very well known nationally speaking. Maya Wiley, Sean Donovan, Eric Adams, these lesser known candidates, frankly, don't really make an image of themselves nationally speaking, and unsurprisingly so, because it's a local race. The New York City mayoral race is for New York City. It's not for New York State, and it's certainly not for the United States. Now, in terms of Poland, Poland works a little bit differently in New York City. So New York City runs its elections, or it's going to run its elections a bit differently. Normally, we work under the first past the post system, which means whichever candidate has the plurality of the votes wins the election, wins the primary. And that has changed in this election, where it works like a ranked choice voting. So New York City residents and New Yorkers will go to the polls and they will rank their candidates from 1 to 10, I believe. And what will happen is they rank one of these candidates first, and then they rank another candidate second, and then so on and so forth. And finally, when it starts to all be tabulated, in the first round, the votes, the candidate with the least amount of votes gets eliminated, and those votes then go on to their second choice, hence the ranked choice voting system. And that keeps going on and on and on until there's just one candidate left, or I guess two candidates left, and then whoever has the majority wins the election. And you can see here through these polls that the ranked choice system it's actually doing its job. As you can see, this is where the candidates start to get eliminated. And then obviously you have other candidates here that are getting eliminated throughout these rounds. These are lesser known candidates that are unlikely to win and unlikely to get any kind of name recognition sooner or later, with the primary season ending on June 22nd. June 22nd is when Democrats in New York City go to the polls. And this is what pollsters are saying so far. It's a very close race with Andrew Yang and as well as Eric Adams. Andrew Yang, I believe, is the purple one, and then Eric Adams is the teal one. And you can see that it's been, it used to be Andrew Yang leading the pack, but as the race has gotten closer, it's gotten way more narrow. It's gotten narrower, and you can see that Eric Adams has been leading in a couple of polls. You can see here in the Public Opinion Strategies poll that even though Andrew Yang has the plurality of the votes in the first couple of rounds, Eric Adams ultimately ends out with 52% of the vote. And then you can see here with Emerson College that Eric Adams leads throughout all of the polls. And then Change Research, you can see that it's an absolute tie. And you can see that this is a change from polls before, showing that Andrew Yang was destined to win. And then if you look at the first past the polls, post polls, which just directly sampling the plurality of the vote, you can see that it's been back and forth between Andrew Yang and Eric Adams. Andrew Yang is trying to bring an experience of small businesses, and then Eric Adams is trying to make New York City a crime front, or a city that that doesn't have crime, because he used to be an NYPD officer. And that's practically most of what is need to know about the New York City mayoral election, especially if you're not from the New York City area. So, yeah, in terms of the Republican primary, I'll just go through the list of the names, I guess, but they're unlikely to actually win. The two main candidates are Fernando Mateo and Claudia Silva, but besides those two candidates, there really aren't any major candidates. I think those are really the only candidates that are running in the Republican primary, and it shows that Republicans are almost definitely not going to win this election. But it's the Democratic primary that's important. It's all these endorsements that you see right here that will ultimately help decide the election of the New York City mayor. And you can see here, we can go through the list pretty quickly. So Eric Adams, the main endorsements, Thomas Susie, and then a lot of state assemblymen and state assemblywomen, and then you also have a lot of council members. And then here for Sean Donovan, it's mainly John Hickenlooper and more nationally known individuals. For Catherine Garcia, it's state legislatures, as well as the New York Times editorial board. And then Raymond McGuire, you have Gregory Meeks. For Dianne Morales, again, mainly state legislatures. For Scott Stringer, he used to have a lot of endorsements, but as you can see, a lot of them withdrew their endorsements because of sexual assault allegations by Gene Kim against Scott Stringer, and that's why he's kind of fallen in the polls recently. And then finally, we have Maya Wiley, who has had 3 U.S. representatives endorse her. Isaac is not really that well known in this race. And then Andrew Yang has 2 endorsements from U.S. representatives, Grace Meng, and then Richie Torres, and as well as a couple of state legislatures, but mainly individuals who are keen on trying to shake up New York City. And in terms of analogies for these candidates, Andrew Yang is kind of like Donald Trump, except it's mainly Donald Trump in the ideas, or in the vision, the overall vision of New York, where he wants to shake it up and he wants something new. For Eric Adams, he's the Joe Biden of this race. He wants something moderate, and he wants to build back better for New York City. And then Catherine Garcia and as well as Scott Stringer, they're both Bernie Sanders candidates. They want progressive ideas, and they want ideas that will enrich the lives of lower class individuals living in New York City. For Sean Donovan, he's trying to make himself seem like the Bloomberg of this competition, not through money, but rather through Michael Bloomberg's policies when he was New York City mayor, with his housing, obviously not with his stop and frisk, but housing. It's mainly housing and urban development. And then Catherine Garcia, we've already mentioned about. Raymond McGuire is trying to be like any kind of Wall Street executive who wants to run for political power. So kind of like someone from Goldman Sachs. Phil Murphy. So like a Goldman Sachs kind of person who wants to then get into politics. And those are the main candidates that we have in this race. Maya Wiley and Dianne Morales, there isn't really much of an equivalent to them. I guess you could say Maya Wiley is similar to Kamala Harris in that she's moderate and she wants to get the votes of Black Americans, but they're kind of different in their policies, individually speaking. So that's the end of this video. I hope you enjoyed it. This video is now adjourned, and I'll see you in the next one.